Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's consultation session from Commitment to Practice, Reviewing National Action Plans on Business and Human Rights in Southeast Asia. My name is Renita Naik from OHCHR, or the UN Human Rights Office, and it is my pleasure today to moderate this important discussion. We are gathered here to engage in a meaningful and collaborative review of the National Action Plans, NAPs as we call them, that countries in the region have developed to implement the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Our objective today is to take stock of current practices, share reflections, and explore how these commitments can be effectively translated into concrete actions on the ground. This consultation is an opportunity to hear diverse perspectives, and it's great to see a diverse audience here, including voices from government, civil society, youth, and other stakeholders, and to strengthen the implementation of these plans and promote respect for human rights in the business sector. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes on the format that we hope to follow. We will start with brief opening remarks, followed by reflections from our distinguished speakers. We are waiting for one more, who will set the context and share their insights on NAPs in the ASEAN region. Following that, we will move into a World Cafe kind of breakout session where we will have 3 to 4 groups with a facilitator each. And each group will focus on one of the outcome areas that we hope to arrive at by the end of this discussion. These have to do with various characteristics of national action plans. During these discussions, the facilitators will capture your inputs. We will take 40 minutes for the breakout group discussions, after which we will reconvene in plenary for facilitators to share the key insights that emerged from these groups. And finally, all participants will be invited to share their top recommendations via an interactive mentimeter poll. And we will close with a brief wrap-up highlighting the main takeaways and next steps. I encourage everyone to actively participate, share openly, and listen respectfully. Your contributions are vital to making this consultation a success and advancing business and human rights in the region. With that, let me hand over to my colleague Katya Kiritsi, Deputy Representative, OHCHR, to open the session with remarks on the importance of NAPs in the ASEAN region. Over to you, Katya.
Thank you, Renita. Dr. Pichamon Yofongong, who just joined us, Chairperson and Asia-Pacific member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, Edmund Mon, Chair of AHR, distinguished representatives from a wide spectrum of duty bearers and right holders in the room, joining us both in person and online, dear colleagues and friends. Good afternoon. I'm really honored to welcome you all as we gather for this important session from Commitment to Practice, reviewing national action plans on business and human rights in Southeast Asia. Over the past years in our region, we have made really promising strides in the development, adoption, and implementation of NAPs. We have seen increasing awareness of the importance of baseline assessment, multi-stakeholder consultation, the alignment of NAPs with other international principles and frameworks such as the Sustainable Development Goal. These are significant steps. They reflect both political will and the recognition that human rights and responsible business conduct are not peripheral, but essential for sustainable development and to advance the implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Despite this progress, several persistent gaps and obstacles remain in the implementation and design of NAPs across the region. And this includes the lack of legal status and binding obligation, which limits their enforceability, consistency across their components, and accountability, weak monitoring, reporting, and transparency, with often vague commitments, unclear indicators, timeframes, and assigned responsibilities around and across various line ministers, limited participation of stakeholders, including informal workers, migrant workers, human rights defenders, indigenous peoples, youth, children, and affected communities, often insufficiently consulted or involved. And barriers to remedy and access to justice. Everywhere rights are recognized, but access to redress and business for related abuses, especially cross borders, remains weak. So against this backdrop, this consultation is extremely timely. And we hope it will provide an opportunity to reflect not merely on the text of the NAPs, but also their alignment with the UN Guiding Principles and human rights, the quality, inclusivity, and transparency of processes, how business and sectoral risks are addressed, how remedies are provided, and how their implementation is monitored and resourced. National action plans on business and human rights in Southeast Asia are a crucial tool for putting the protect, respect, and remedy framework into practice. While we have seen promising developments in the region, if these NAPs are to truly make a difference, they need to be transformative, inclusive, transparent, accountable, and deeply rooted in the lives of the people they're meant to protect. So the UN Guiding Principles provide a clear global and universal framework, and it remains critical that the NAPs translate principles and commitments into practice through political will, legal frameworks, adequate resources, and inclusive dialogue. Let us not forget that the NAPs are not the end goal. They are a means to an end. And the path forward must therefore be one of collaboration between governments, business, civil society, human rights defenders, indigenous peoples, and affected community. But above all, it needs to be a path of accountability. So I really look forward to our discussion today with concrete insights and bold ideas that can help honor the UN Guiding Principles, not just referencing them, but through their meaningful realization. And I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Katya. May I now call upon Edmund Bon, Chair of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or OHCHR, to speak on the significance of national action plans in the ASEAN region. Over to you, Edmund.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Renita and moderator, and thank you, Katya, for those kind comments, and Pichamon also for inviting me. I wanted to share some insights as to what ASEAN has been looking at, some challenges and the opportunities for countries that are looking into business and human rights agenda and the NAPs. This idea of the NAPs, I think at OHCHR in collaboration with UNDP for some years now, I think we started, and Livio is here in 2016, has been an ongoing debate. There has been a lot of criticisms about NAP. We have to acknowledge it. NAPs provide, on one hand, there are criticisms about how the NAP provides breathing space for governments not to do anything or to buy time and come up with standards that may be a bit weaker, or some NAPs do not go far enough. Thailand had the first real NAP in the region, and then now have the second NAP, and you can see quite openly how the Thai NAP has been criticized, as well as NAPs from other countries which are not as well publicized, or in countries where media and democratic space is a bit less open. But on the other hand, I think when we look at the positive side of NAP, I would say that there are three main points. I call it LML. One is localizing, two is mapping, and three is looking ahead. When we talk about what the regional human rights mechanisms around the world do, Africa, Inter-America, Europe, we really must understand that the UN is very, very far away. I know I've been a vocal critic of the UN, although they fund a lot of important work, and we still need the UN, and we're talking about changing the legal order is a different conversation altogether, but the UN, Geneva, New York is just too far away for our people. And the idea about regional human rights mechanisms was really, when OHCHR conceptualized it and pushed it, you think about regional human rights mechanisms as safety nets or mechanisms or creatures of institutions that aim to vernacularize or localize international standards. But what has happened in the African inter-American systems and even now in the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission this year, as I will elaborate a little bit further, is that we have to see norms or human rights norms for the region, not us as just being passive recipients of what Geneva tells us or what the UNGPs tells us or what the UNGPs requires to implement, but as active contributors to that process. And the regional human rights mechanisms like Africa, Inter-America, and now OHCHR has been contributing to that progress and to that contestation as to human rights norms around corporate accountability. So the first point about localizing is very important, vernacularizing how the UNGPs being developed so far away requires regional human rights mechanisms like the one that I chair and ASEAN to use language that is more palatable, more acceptable, perhaps for corporates, as well as to have those language and actions taken up in a way that's culturally, politically, and socially more acceptable. So, of course, without diluting human rights standards, but the important thing is about how these international norms from far away in the global north travel down to the global south, but also as global south countries, we cannot continue to be seen as mere recipients of what we have been told or asked to do. And the whole issue about colonization and how the UNGPs and how business and human rights may seem as another wave of the global north is something, it's a debate that continues to play on our minds here in the region, and we need to be wary about that. But the principles, again, I say when we localize it, doesn't mean that we dilute those international standards. We translate it in a way that governments in this region are able to implement it in a way that, as I mentioned, politically, socially, and culturally acceptable. So localizing is one. Two is mapping. I think national action plans, for whatever you say, starts a process within governments and member states. And Thailand started because there was a UPR recommendation to have a NAP. And from there, there was a lot of advocacy around different member states, including Malaysia, to move on its NAP, and we have launched it recently. And the architect is there, Dr. Punita. You should be speaking to her, not to me, but we are very proud about our NAP in Malaysia, and it allows us, looking at the process, we had a national baseline assessment report, and then we have a national action plan. It allows us actually to map the whole process, get all the stakeholders on the table, and then bring together all the different difficult, challenging topics to implement in a way that's more organized. Of course, the NAP in Malaysia, I use that as an example because it's the most recent one. It's 5 years. It has 3 components: labor, environment, and governance. And for me, I'm very proud to say that it's I think one of the better NAPs in the region. For it covers things that we have been debating about in Malaysia for a long time. So just to mention some of the key elements as an example of how we have mapped our issues, I'll just raise 10 from the Malaysian NAP. Environmental human rights defenders is mentioned in the NAP. The human rights defenders language about how we should have meaningful participation in environmental human rights defenders is something that is very positive. We have online safety and laws and regulations against child exploitation, including digital rights for children and young people. We have things on the right to safe, clean, healthy, and environment, including amending our federal constitution, which has been debated for a long time, and we hope that it will happen. We have mandatory human rights due diligence as something which none of us really thought we would have, but we have it. We have things on anti-greenwashing legislation, anti-SLAPP laws, although it's still not as developed, the issue of SLAPP in Malaysia. We are litigating it in 2 court cases in Malaysia. But looking at anti-SLAPP legislation is again very important. Access to remedies, FPIC for indigenous people, strengthening their rights, implementation of UN DRIP in a more concerted, more holistic way in our national laws, enhancing corporate grievance mechanisms, including legal aid for communities and the poor, enhancing legal aid, and also strategic litigation. So these are things, as practitioners in Malaysia, we would never really have seen in a government document. We had previously a Malaysian human rights action plan that was not as progressive, but we have seen now a business and human rights action plan that covers both corporate and state responsibilities, which I think is a way forward that's very positive for human rights in Malaysia. And finally, looking ahead, I think the positive side of NAPS allows us to prioritize some of the 10 issues that I've mentioned. I don't know whether the government is able to have the resources and capacity to actually implement all these major 10 things there, but if they can, in the next 5 years, it will be a major achievement. But the multi-stakeholder approach, the collaboration that is required, one, of course, is political will. I think this current government has a minister and a team that is extremely active. They have the human rights portfolio in Malaysia and has been pushing this quite hard, and therefore I think it's moved in a way that nobody really expected it to move so swiftly. But political will is not enough. We need capacity support, technical resources, expertise, learning from best practices of other countries, and also at the ASEAN level with a lot of the different challenges to donor funding. Again, that's another conversation. It's going to be quite difficult if the government does not pour in resources from our own side. At the Commission, at the OHCHR level, we have been working on business and human rights, human rights, climate change, migration, environment, and we've brought all of this together. We've been working on it since 2015, and my first term in the Commission. We brought all this together through 2 new upcoming ASEAN declarations. One will definitely be adopted in October. Was controversial for a while. Past 3 years, we've been working on an ASEAN declaration on the right to safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment. Again, as an example of localizing what the UNGA, the UNHRC, and now what the ICJ advisory opinion has delivered as to a right to safe, clean, healthy environment in ASEAN. And the second one that we're working on is the ASEAN Declaration on the right to development and peace towards inclusive and sustainable development. That covers the 4 different areas, right to development, political, social, cultural, economic development, including business and human rights. And this is an example. This morning, at a session, one of our officers from our Ministry of Trade mentioned that when you talk about business and human rights and the language of due diligence sitting in the Commission, people get very uncomfortable. They say this is a Western concept, this is a European concept. But when you talk about it in terms of what it means for the human right to development, economic development, political, social, cultural development, ASEAN member states immediately become comfortable. And this is an example of how, and this was one of our agendas as Malaysia's as chairmanship of Malaysia's chairmanship of ASEAN, chairship of ASEAN, leadership of ASEAN, and our inclusivity and sustainability agenda as to how we could localize and vernacularize human rights through some of these efforts. I just want to stop there. I know I don't have much time, and maybe we can have engagement through questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Shall I just start?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Edmund, and thank you, of course, for joining us today. It's been wonderful to see your leadership within ASEAN and for the support that you've also lent to the business and human rights agenda. And thank you, of course, to everyone who has taken the time today to come and join this, I would say, important discussion on national action plans, what has worked, what has not worked, and what does the future look like. I see some very familiar faces in the room, which is always great, and also some new faces. And I hope in the World Cafe breakout session that we'll have right after this, you'll be able to share your views, your experiences in relation to the NAP development process and where we should be thinking about it heading into the future. So in my remarks, I'm going to keep this as short as I can because what Katya and Edmund have said very much resonates with my own views in relation to the utility of national action plans, but also the pitfalls and the risks that come with NAPs as well. I would say that localization is certainly a very big issue, as Edmund has already pointed out. It's important for these documents to be sensitized and localized amongst governments, businesses, and of course the civil society as well, and to ensure that those who stand to be most affected by these national action plans, that they are very much part of the process in relation to their development, but also in relation to their implementation. And this was a key message that I received as soon as I joined the working group back in, I would say, mid-2022. Immediately then, of course, we were, in a sense, excited with the momentum that we were seeing in this region around business and human rights and national action plans. And there was a lot of discussion about, is this where we're headed? Voluntary measures, what about mandatory measures, what about the smart mix? And immediately, at least for me, that triggered, a real desire to better understand, to better assess where national action plans have led us in relation to broader business and human rights commitments within this region. And so, of course, I have to emphasize here that according to the guiding principles on business and human rights, we encourage a smart mix. We value both voluntary approaches as well as mandatory ones. And so they should not be mutually exclusive. And of course, it would sound extremely naive of me if I were to say that, this is an ideal that's easily realized, because of course, in reality, we know that it's very difficult to realize the smart mix. We know that even with voluntary approaches like national action plans, it's still a process and it's still very difficult, as many of the people in this room here can attest to. And so for the working group, it's about collecting these experiences, about understanding what the challenges are, but also what are the advantages to designing, to developing, and to implementing these national action plans, in the hope that we can help to inform, the action plan to implement the national action plan for countries. And I'm looking here at colleagues from Malaysia who have indeed celebrated the launch of their national action plan. And it's really the purpose of this session and the purpose of this project really is to see how we can help inform the future of business and human rights in this region, and also to help governments, businesses, and civil society better understand how to leverage national action plans as a force for good in that regard. So far, just to share insights that I've been able to gain already from bilateral and some multi-stakeholder consultations that I've done. And I must say that even though the project has only really been formalized over last year, this is in fact an activity that the working group, I myself have been engaging in since 2023. So in conversations with stakeholders, in formal meetings with stakeholders across the board, I've been collecting information and evidence and views. And so I thought I'd share some of them with you today. So in relation to national action plans, I think the general view that has been collated so far from stakeholders, and I would say this numbers over the past 2.5 years, at least about 500 or so people I've spoken to about national action plans. I would view NAPs as kind of along a spectrum, right? If on one side of the spectrum we have national action plans acting as important guidance and as a means to better understand the business and human rights issues within the country, on the other side of the spectrum we have the view of national action plans being a way for governments to undermine international human rights standards and state obligations under the UNGPs. So there are two very distinct opposing views on both sides of the spectrum. But of course, as we move closer and closer towards the middle, we have a variety of other views of national action plans, for example, as necessary entry points, especially for more difficult or challenging contexts where the guiding principles and concepts of business and human rights or responsible business conduct are yet to be truly sensitized to whether it be the government, businesses, or civil society there. And then on the other side of the spectrum is the view that national action plans are paper commitments only. So they don't ever get implemented in practice. They sit there as a beautiful document that states can refer to as indicating their commitment, but nothing really happens. And then as we shift towards the middle of that spectrum, the view is that national action plans serve as a useful means for a state to meet its business and human rights obligations under the UNGPs, and for businesses to have a better sense of what their responsibility to respect human rights looks like. But at the same time, that can also be at risk of being used by governments to deflect demands for mandatory measures, in this case for mandatory human rights due diligence. So it's a bit of a more mixed perception of national action plans in that light. So already I think over the course of the past 2.5 years, those are the key categories of perceptions that I have been able to glean from stakeholders and also from publications and assessments in academic outlets, etc., about these national action plans. My curiosity, of course, and what I've set out to do with the support of OHCHR, of UNICEF, of ILO, of UNDP, of others present in this room, is to try and ascertain whether that spectrum-based understanding is in fact valid. Does it actually reflect the views of those of you in this room? Is it too simplistic a way to categorize how we think about national action plans? Or can it be used as a departure point for us to then better assess what the strengths and the weaknesses are? And so this is what we will have to do over the next several months to try and discern. And this is where, as a working group member and as the chair of the working group, I would really value your contributions and your support for this project, because I think it's very clear. With Malaysia having joined the NAP team, I understand the Philippines is also now taking very seriously its commitment to developing a national action plan as well, perhaps next year. And I'm sure there will be other countries that will soon join that group of states. But we need to, of course, assess whether this is indeed a useful exercise where a lot of resources and time are being invested into this process, and what about it we can leverage in order to advance the implementation of the guiding principles. So with that, I think I've gone on for much longer than I thought. And as I said before, your views are really important here, as are your experiences. So please feel free to share as frankly as you would like to share in your respective breakout groups. And I think for the working group at least, I wanted to reiterate that we value national action plans. In fact, we had put out a call of sorts back in the day to say that we want to see national action plans developed in this region and in other regions. Given the uncertainty that we see in the world today, we need to assess the situation and, of course, make sure that we are still aligned with the realities on the ground. Given limited resources and everything else, we need to know that national action plans are still a valuable way forward into the future for business and human rights here. So with that, let me hand it back over to colleagues to help facilitate the second part of this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Pichamon, for setting the context and the stage for the next phase of our discussion. As we mentioned, we will break out into 4 groups, so some clustering will have to happen. Can I ask colleagues to please move together as much as possible and use some of the tables up front? If you would like to just move up a little. We will put up the discussion areas up on the screen briefly, 3 outcomes, and we would like each group to take up 1 outcome each, and there are some guiding questions below each. We will, of course, be moving around the room to help guide and steer the discussions. If everyone could choose one facilitator per group who will also report back in plenary and also take notes. We will have about just under 40 minutes for this discussion and reconvene at 10 past 3 to present in plenary, please. For colleagues online, I'm afraid we tried to arrange breakout groups, online breakout groups, but due to a technical reason, that hasn't been possible. So if you would like to please put your comments in the chat and also come in later during the plenary if you have specific recommendations to make. So apologies for that, but yeah, I hope this can work. Thank you.
Colleagues, can we please come back so that we can share findings from each of the discussion groups? I also must say I heard laughter earlier, which was nice to hear. Please settle back into your seats. Please settle back into your seats. I don't think that voice worked, actually. Everyone, can you please settle back into your seats, and we will now start the sharing process. All right. I don't want to take your role, Renita, but I think people are more or less settled in, so you can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Pichaman. Can we start with the presentations now? We will have to stick to a maximum of 3 minutes. Maybe we start with whichever group picked outcome 1. Are there any that picked outcome 1 to discuss? Okay, there you go. Would you like to start by presenting?
You can as well.
Make sure to use the mic, please, since it's being recorded. Okay,
Hello,
that group
can you hear
and then
me?
this one.
Okay. My name is Pwadumbi from the National Human Rights Commission of Nigeria. And I'm going to be speaking on behalf of Outcome 1 from this table. I don't know if other tables spoke on Outcome 1. So one of the things we talked about, was the fact that, yes, indeed, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, be it a catalyst, but it is not necessarily the end goal. It's supposed to be like a launch box that launches you to do better. And that the NAPs often act as a stepping stone, sparking discourse, coordination, and policy dialogue. Like we have one of our colleagues mentioned our Vietnam colleagues and the Lao mentioned that it really helped them in having a coordinated discussion on human rights, which is not actually something that you get to find discussed on the streets of Vietnam. And that their value lies in opening space where human rights discourse is otherwise limited. Then there's awareness and implementation gap that was identified. And many companies remain unaware of NAPs, example like Japan, and they see it as a technical checklist exercise, like the German experience or the UK experience. And then we talked about the lack of local expertise and stakeholder representation, which undermines the effective implementation of the NAP. And then we had issues of sectoral issues that were emerging issues from the NAP, like I discussed. As a result of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, we realized that issues that had to do with digital rights were not initially embedded in our NAP. And that has led the country now, that's Nigeria now, to develop another National Action Plan on digital rights. Tomorrow now, we are going to be launching the assessment that was the nationwide assessment that was carried out, and the national advisory, on digital rights in Nigeria as a result of the emerging issues we are having in the digital space. Now, NAPs are meant to be driving attention to new areas. Okay, like I said, the digital right, the financial sector, compliance, and because a lot of people now get to do the right thing, we had people approaching the National Human Rights Commission of Nigeria to help them develop a human rights policy, as a result of the NAP, because we had engagement with the financial institutions, which were the Central Bank of Nigeria that regulates the financial sector. We had engagement with them, and that has led to them having a new kind of policy for people or investors or persons who want to carry out business in the financial sector as well as the communication sector. One of the things we also discussed was the fact that these were absent from the earlier NAPs, and it shows that there's a need for an updated or a second generation plan. And then when it came to issues of access to remedy, a lot of people said that it's weak. Access to remedy remains weak. And although Pillar 1, the state duty to protect has seen more traction, Pillar 2 and 3 lagged behind. And one of the things we discussed was the fact that why Pillar 3 may be lacking so much behind is because of the regimented style of the judiciary, especially when it has to do with state-based judicial mechanisms. Most courts are not so adventurous in giving effect or remedy to issues that are contained in treaties or just soft laws. They want to rely on hard fact statutes. And that has led us in the country as Nigerians to also engage the judiciary on their realization of the fact that National Human Rights Commission is the custodian of all the treaties that the country has signed, and we are obligated to give effect and remedy to some of the provisions, the UN Guiding Principle being one of them, and looking at the fact that the country has now also adopted a national action plan on business and human rights. Because I know sometimes back, the Commission had a judgment against it for venturing to listen to complaints that had to do with environmental rights issues. And that's why we needed to really educate the judicial system. Although there are other mechanisms like the non-state judicial mechanism, or non-state judicial mechanism, which has organizations like the Ombudsman and the Commission as places where people can come for remedy. And in addition to that, we also have communities of faith-based organizations who have also dabbled into issues of giving remedy to complaints of people whose rights have been violated in the course of businesses. So the judicial system remains rigid, like in Nigeria, while non-judicial mechanisms, ombudsman, like the International Community and community leaders play a critical role in this.
Sorry, if you could wind up now.
Okay, yes, I'm actually winding up now. So we talked about issues of mandatory due diligence is the next frontier. Countries like Germany and Australia show NAPs evolving into frameworks that support mandatory human rights due diligence. And for credibility, NAPs must move beyond voluntary reporting to enforceable standards with penalties for non-compliance. And that's one of the things we talked about. And in closing, I said something that we can make mandatory voluntary when you target the finances of companies. When they know that they get to lose a lot, they tend to comply voluntarily. And so by so doing, you have made mandatory voluntary. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we move on to a group that discussed outcome 2. Later, if there is time, we can come back to the other groups as well, but just in terms of the time we have. Anybody who went with outcome 2? No? Okay, outcome 3 then, let's move on to that one. Who would like to present? Oh, okay, here and then there. 3 minutes, please.
Hello? Okay. Okay, I will be presenting on outcome 3. Our group discussed on meaningful participation of rights holders. So basically, we shared according to the experiences of 3 countries: Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, and also to a certain extent Mongolia and also India. But then in Malaysia, we had meaningful participation of rights holders. For example, in the development of our NAP, we engaged with various rights holders in our national baseline assessment. We did around 20 engagements with them across 400 individuals. And after our baseline assessment, we also did engage with many groups. But there were some groups that we had limited engagement with. For example, Malaysia being Malaysia, we did limited engagement with LGBT groups, refugee groups, due to existing government policy. Other than that, there was also interesting points raised by the representative from Philippines. She stated that there was limited, in the Philippines, there was limited engagement with indigenous peoples, meaning the engagements were centered in the capital of Manila, and there were limited engagements in the rural areas. Other than that, in Indonesia, there are problems on transparency, whereby there were limited, the public had limited access towards databases where they cannot access who the government has engaged, and those are the problems on transparency in Indonesia. And I think, in Malaysia also, for implementation, we are also going to engage with various groups. For example, we have a multi-stakeholder monitoring and evaluation group, whereby we are going to bring representatives from businesses, civil society representatives, and human rights advocates. So I think we are going to engage with various groups in Malaysia, and I think across ASEAN also there will be a similar approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we had a group back there. Is it also outcome 3? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, namaste, Zojalapa. My name is Praveen. In our group 2, we discussed the same outcome. Apparently, nobody discussed outcome number 2, unfortunately. So in our group, we had participants from Nepal, Korea, Japan, Philippines, Philippines, I think, and Singapore. Singapore does not have a NAP, so he did not participate. But in the experiences of Nepal, Korea, Japan, and Philippines, I think lots are common factors. There are a lot of commonalities. So in the case of Nepal, the NAP development process was facilitated under a project, UNDP project, with the funding from the government of Japan and other European country, I think, another European country. So because of this project, the process was somewhat participatory. There were consultations undertaken with different right holder groups and CSOs. However, all the comments put forth on the National Action Plan during these consultations fell on deaf ears, so it was not meaningful. While the process was somewhat inclusive, the participation was not meaningful, I think, is the gist of it. In the context of Korea, they don't have a separate NAP on business and human rights, but there's a section under the National Action Plan on human rights, on business and human rights. On business, the consultation for that National Action Plan were semi-public, through semi-public hearings, but CSOs were not meaningfully consulted, was the experience shared. In the case of Japan, which is reviewing its National Action Plan, the National Action Plan lacks strong commitments. Public hearings were undertaken, and the Japanese government report of scores of comments received, but received online. But the experience in the table was also that the participation of CSOs was not meaningful or weak, was weak. in the context of Philippines, for the NAP consultation that were facilitated through Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, the National Human Rights Institution, the process was meaningful. It involved different stakeholders, including businesses, CSOs, rights holders groups, but the government did not own it, did not own the NAP that came out of that process. No, now they have an intent to develop a NAP, a roadmap for a NAP. So yeah, it's a lot of NAPs. In the case of Thailand, Malaysia, the experience was that specific vulnerable groups like migrant workers were ignored or were left out from the National Action Plan process. So based on all these experiences, I think there are like few points that I would, one first good point is that the NAP processes have resulted in increase in some awareness about business and human rights among businesses and some rights holder groups or some CSOs, but it has not been broad, or it has not been general. It has not gone beyond small circles. For meaningful participation, what we discussed was that meaningful participation should be ground up. Meaningful participation in National Action Plan process should be ground up, and particularly with impacted communities. And these consultations for NAPs should not just happen at the capitals, in the capitals, or within closed hotel doors. No. What we see is for meaningful participation, there's also need for a good facilitating organization. Perhaps a National Human Rights Institution could be such organization to bring different stakeholders together, different rights, including the rights holders. And such a facilitating organization should go beyond selective participation of rights holders or CSOs or businesses too. What we also discussed was patriarchal mindsets, or inherent discriminatory traditions in certain countries also result in further marginalization of right holder groups in the participation in NAP. No, and across the table, I think the issue was that NAPs lack accountability and monitoring. These are mainly voluntary, so it should be backed up by a law. No, I think laws, NAPs are not the best tool to promote human rights and business and human rights agenda. Laws could be a better tool to generate wider public discourse, including at the parliamentary level and through increased media attention. So yeah, I think that was the discussion in the table. More push for mandatory measures or legal measures. Thanks.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. There's been quite a few observations already with regard to both, well, the two outcome areas. Is there anything that other groups would like to complement to what's been already said on outcome one? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, you can.
Hi, yeah. On outcome one, I think we've had a lot of insight from the kind of government side, but how this plays into the corporate sector and how they take their, responsibility based on the NAPs, and looking at the UNGPs, the kind of protect, respect, remedy, the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises as well. I think what we kind of boiled it down to, from the very diverse range of people and countries we have on this table, is risk and responsibility. We found that given the lack of bite or enforcement in the law, and actually the lack of clear articulation of what it is that they need to do as a business, what is the risk, and how do we move from that voluntary? We have clear steps of maybe what should be there, but moving that from mandatory, and even beyond having it as mandatory, if we look at comparators from the UK Modern Slavery Act or the Australian Modern Slavery Act as examples, we still have difficulty because of how that plays into how that's enforced in the courts, and in a way in which, yes, we need to increase maybe the penalties of what that looks like, and how that really affects them. Then we looked at some of the other points in terms of remedies. We have issues in terms of, for someone that's coming in that may be vulnerable, a migrant coming in and working in a business and not having the protections they need. They may have issues with their immigration. There's already conflation between smuggling and trafficking. They're putting themselves in heightened risk, and there may also be issues with grievance mechanisms, ways in which they have access to legal representation if they have documents that are not within a way that they would feel comfortable to come forward. These were also ways in which actually, yes, it links to business and human rights, because the corporates obviously need to understand what's happening within their supply chain and hold accountable for that. And I think even if you do that, we come back to this same point of risk and responsibility. Why is it, and what is going to drive that change for these, from a business perspective, obviously from a government as well, to actually move? And I think that is the complexity also at scale, really having these big corporates that have hundreds of thousands of suppliers and being able to vet those or look at those. And, looking at this region, they may put international standards on a supplier, in Vietnam or Bangladesh or India, for example, and it may not be plausible. So as you were saying at the beginning, is it a case of rephrasing that into development, making it easier for those suppliers to actually do it so we can get those corporates on our side to actually drive change? So I think those were some of our perspectives. I didn't know if you had anything more to add.
Oh, sure. I will supplement a very short point here. John Hu from M4E. I would say it's very important to see national strategies and trade strategies to be tied with the NEPs, rather than having just NEPs that would tie with the UNGPs. It's very important to think what the countries need. Some countries may want to have a more export-oriented market, and HREDD is very important when they're thinking about CSDDD or other due diligence regulations worldwide. Some countries thinking about the OECD membership, and HRDD seems to be an important element to get this bit. So I think this is something important to look into: trade strategies, national strategies, and ambition when it comes to the NAPs here. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think a very rich compilation that we have already. Thank you. We would like to, before we move on to the last part of the discussion, we have a couple of online comments, but just to assure participants who are online, we have made a note of the comments and we have recorded this session, so we will have access to what you had to say. Thank you. We'd now like to move to a short poll that you see up here on screen, and this is on Mentimeter. So if you'd like to use your phone and just scan the QR code on screen, you can also go to menti.com if you're using your laptop and type in the code that you see up on the screen, and that will take you to the poll. So menti.com if you're going on the website, and the code is 98597150. And if you could please provide your reflection on the top achievements, challenges, and priorities that you see there with regard to NAPS. We'll take a few minutes for you to do this. Thank you. Okay, I think that covers everybody, right? Can we move on to the next question? Okay, that's a good number of responses. We have one more question, the last one. Thank you. So this is, you just need to type out what you think are the critical priorities, a word or a phrase, and we'll see what comes up. Okay, I think we have all the responses in, and now I think it's now just playing around with the design. But thank you so much. Thank you for this. I think this will go a long way in informing future work, including the study we have planned. Let me now hand over to Pitchamon. Luckily, we have this room for a little longer. So Pitchamon, if you would like to deliver closing remarks. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Renita. And thank you, colleagues, for joining in the discussions and for sharing your thoughts through Mentimeter as well. All of this has been very helpful, and I can assure you that this will not be the only consultation that we conduct going forward. In order to ensure meaningful participation of all rights holders, we'll ensure that there are continued conversations about the national action plans that we see in this region. As I've said before, national action plans can certainly be a force for good, but we have also seen and we have also heard from rights holders how national action plans, when designed poorly and not implemented well, can in fact result in potentially even more harms. So this is why we're embarking on this study and on this project. We know it's not going to be easy, but I hope we can count on you for your contributions and your continued engagement to help ensure that the results of this study will be as comprehensive as possible, as constructive as needed, and also as as helpful in terms of shaping how we think about the future of business and human rights in this region. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you very much, Edmund, for being part of this. And over to you, Renita, to close us out.
Not much more to say. Thank you, Pichamon. Thank you, Edmund, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for your active engagement. Have a good evening.